Hello everyone, today we will talk about transiting Saturn. Saturn passes through the sign of Pisces. The way Saturn behaves in transit through the sign of Pisces depends on the position of the sign of Pisces in the individual's natal chart and the house order of Pisces. This transit can be more prominent in your life when you have other planets in Pisces, transit, or natal, heavy or light aspects to Neptune. But the basics are as follows. Well, as with all planets in astrology and in natal charts, there are good and bad placements. Today we will talk about transiting Saturn in Pisces, and of course we will talk about the worst position of Saturn. As we already know, there are no bad and good planets. There are only good and bad positions and angles. So let's see what damage Saturn, who rules order and public presentation, will do when thrown into the shapeless waters of Pisces. We can certainly say that the media and cultural part will reach an irresistibly bombastic deluge, and mass surveillance will flourish in the 3 years of Saturn's movement. The government becomes a hidden enemy for who knows how many times, and the socially vulnerable become victims. These are all scenarios that we see and experience almost every 28 to 30 years. Spirituality, which you use as your faith to create structure in your lives, stops being taken seriously, because Saturn is not afraid to show discipline whenever we start to wander. It is no wonder that Saturn is known in some circles as the Lord of Karma precisely because of this limitation and structuring of something that should not be limited. But he is no master here, he is just afraid to let go and lose control. Unlike Cancer and Scorpio, where either it cannot exert any influence or it loses its footing, Saturn in Pisces presents itself falsely, creates a world through boundaries and rules, while Pisces already has its own reality, which is that they don't have one at all. Ultimately, Saturn in Pisces lives according to its own set of rules and morals that often go against tradition, and as a result we have misunderstandings and loneliness, that is, separation from the spiritual world. Integrating our material and non-material values leads to great frustrations in achieving practical goals, until we learn many new lessons about spirituality, self-sacrifice, emotional well-being and empathy among others. In translation, this would mean limiting one's own sense of empathy and generosity. That's why we should be careful about subtly conveying to others that we don't need kindness, compliments, and support. And be sure to ask yourself if we should be bothered by people who look like victims, or are on another level too outside the box with their spirituality, or are simply different from us in skin color or belief. As we have already stated, Saturn has no mercy for the weak and sick, for the infirm and those who are outside the box. Those who are self-sacrificing and play the role of martyrs will be forced out of fantasyland and face reality on many fronts. Because we all have to function as a collective and we have to get rid of any toxicity that is holding us back, in order to take our own path forward. So Saturn in Pisces will shape the new world for us to a large extent. Let's recall what he has brought so far and what he is most remembered for. In the 30s, little was known about how the disease was transmitted or how it could be stopped. Vaccines were being developed, but before the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was amended in 1938, vaccines did not have to be tested or licensed by the Public Health Service. It is estimated that as many as 1 in every 1,000 cases of polio in 1935 were actually caused by trials of vaccines. In the 60s of 1965, cigarette packaging must feature health warnings. Tobacco companies must print the words "Caution, cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health" on cigarette packaging. In the 90s we see the fall of Pablo Escobar. What is interesting is that in each of these periods, as it is covered by the media, that Saturn establishes control over things that have a bad effect on the population. It does not prevent them, but only takes control over them. Saturn in Pisces always speaks of communities of 1 billion people that need to be structured and limited. Likewise, with the entry of Saturn into Pisces, we see the sentencing of Nelson Mandela to life imprisonment for conspiracy to overthrow the state. The following year, 1 million people were massacred in the Indonesian genocide when the army executed communists to stop a coup attempt. In the 90s, when Saturn re-entered Pisces, Mandela was released from prison. What is also noticeable is that the struggles for human rights, spirituality as seeing that people are spiritual beings, and helping, and humanism, experienced great crises in those periods. But the peak was certainly when the Cultural Revolution began in China, when the CCP issued the May 16 notice in 1966 to justify purges and forced reforms. Mao became the focal point of a personality cult, and his Little Red Book was used by revolutionaries as a manifesto to purge infidels. They destroyed Chinese traditional culture, and millions were massacred, humiliated, or forced to commit suicide. When we look at each of these periods in the last 100 years, starting with Hitler, who started doing segregation in that very period, we see that in each of them there are large protests for civil rights, racial riots, and racial segregation. How can we help ourselves and others without drowning? What will be our life belts? First of all, don't hold on too tightly to anything that can reverse this period, because it won't help. Pisces are subject to strong delusions and often see the world as idyllic and according to their taste, and with the appearance of Saturn, the ideal world needs to be structured and framed. However, by not fully surrendering to these very human qualities, we end up limiting ourselves. So we will work hard and work for the outsider, but we will not feel comfortable and as one, and in the absence of faith or trust in our intuition or life itself, we will often feel unclear and afraid. Saturn becomes a hidden and formidable enemy, so only quiet and hard work can be the real strength of this position. The most important way to protect yourself is to be aware. In whatever area this transition is happening to you. Understanding what is happening will give us a greater sense of purpose as you navigate this transit. If you are a fighter for human rights, or if you are a humanist who voluntarily participates in an association for the protection of animals, it is important that you have a connection with your spiritual self in order to get the help and answers you need. Astrology, tarot, or other forms of divination can be useful tools for discerning spiritual communication. Second thing, find alternative ways of treatment as well as alternative sources of information. And in any case, protect yourself and your energy as you experience the many lessons and blessings that Saturn in Pisces brings.